"Pay up, you poor wretch," my brother laughed. The room erupted, chairs scraping, glasses clinking, someone coughing to hide a snort. I remember the way the word wretch landed like a coin dropped into a well. I didn't argue. I didn't ask what I supposedly owed. I smiled once, thin and polite, then slipped out through the back door so quietly the laughter followed me for half a second before it noticed I was gone. Outside the evening was clean and cold. I stood beside the trash bins and breathed until my hands stopped shaking. Inside, my family was finishing dessert, celebrating a deal I had helped structure, congratulating themselves for finally being free of me. They thought I'd left embarrassed. They thought that was the end of it. An hour later, a courier arrived at the front desk. I didn't see the envelope myself. I learned about it from the security camera log the next morning, time-stamped, neat, undeniable. A white envelope, thick, delivered with a signature. Addressed to my brother. Inside it was a check. That's the part everyone remembers now. The check. The way the room went silent when it was opened. The number written cleanly across the line where numbers go to live forever. But before that, before the envelope, before the silence, there was a normal life. Mine. I had been the one who kept the books when the family business was bleeding. I negotiated the lease extension no one else could get. I paid the penalties when shipments stalled, personally, quietly, because it was easier than explaining. When my brother took credit, I let him. When my parents called him the backbone, I nodded. It was simpler to be useful than to be seen. The laughter that night wasn't new. It was just louder. What they didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd received a call I almost didn't answer. A known number. The voice on the other end spoke carefully, like someone trained to leave nothing to chance. She asked if I was still the guarantor on a line of credit opened 8 years ago. She read out dates, amounts, amendments I hadn't signed. I asked her to email everything. She did. That was the moment my life divided into before and after. Not with a scream. Not with tears. With PDFs, metadata, signatures that weren't mine. Transfers that moved in patterns too tidy to be accidental. A quiet theft done by people who smiled at me across dinner tables. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't warn them. I did what I've always done best. I paid attention. I kept attending meetings. I kept approving invoices. I kept letting my brother feel large. When he laughed that night, he believed the story he'd been telling himself, that I needed them, that I'd always need them, that humiliation was enough to keep me small. So when I left through the back door, he didn't follow. And when the courier handed over the check an hour later, funds released exactly as instructed, exactly when I said, they finally understood something had changed. They just didn't know how much. The email arrived at 6:12 a.m., the subject line bland enough to pass as spam. Credit facility, confirmation. I made coffee before opening it. Not out of calm, out of habit. The kind you build when you've learned that panic wastes time. Inside were attachments labeled with dates that made my stomach tighten. 8 years ago. 6/3. Last quarter. Each file carried a different kind of weight, contracts, addenda, internal approvals, yet they all pointed in the same direction. My name appeared everywhere. My signature did not. I printed everything. Paper slows lies down. It gives you corners to hold. The first proof was the guarantor amendment dated May 14th, 8 years earlier, authorizing a personal guarantee extension tied to the company's revolving credit line. The metadata showed it was created on a device registered to my brother's assistant. The IP address resolved to the office network. The timestamp was 2:03 a.m. I had boarding passes from that night, overnight flight, delayed, gate change. I wasn't even in the city. The second proof was cleaner, uglier. A series of transfers labeled as temporary advances, routed through a shell vendor I'd never approved. The amounts were small enough to avoid alerts, regular enough to form a rhythm. Rent. Car payments. A down payment that lined up perfectly with the house my parents had congratulated my brother on earning. The third proof closed the door on doubt. A witness. I didn't go looking for one. She came to me after I asked accounting for raw exports instead of summaries. She closed my office door and stood there with her hands folded, as if waiting to be excused. She told me she'd been instructed to upload documents after hours and mirror my signature using an old scan pulled from a shared drive. She told me she'd asked questions once. She told me the answer she got, don't worry, she'll never notice. I thanked her. I didn't promise anything I couldn't deliver. I asked her to email me exactly what she'd done, when and under whose instruction. She did. Her message was precise. Dates, names, CCs missing on purpose. By 9:40 a.m., there was nothing left to interpret. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't sloppy accounting or a favor that went too far. It was a system. My usefulness monetized. My silence priced in. I scheduled a meeting with the bank's compliance team, not to accuse, just to clarify exposure. I asked for confirmation of current balances, guarantors, and release terms. They responded within the hour. Institutions always do when liability whispers their name. Then I did the most important thing, I stopped fixing problems. An invoice bounced that afternoon. I let it. A vendor emailed me directly, confused. I forwarded the message to my brother without commentary. In the family group chat, my mother posted a photo from brunch, everyone smiling, my brother's caption loud with confidence. I added a heart. Nothing else. That night, I opened a new folder on my desktop and named it simply, Timeline. I arranged the evidence in order. Not for court. For clarity. Power doesn't announce itself. It assembles. And as I finished, I understood something with a steadiness that surprised me. The check they'd received wasn't generosity. It was a lever. I had stopped being the safety net. I was becoming the record. Once the facts were in place, everything else became easier. I didn't change my tone. I didn't withdraw. I showed up early to meetings and left last, the same as always. I answered emails within minutes. I smiled at jokes I'd heard too many times. If anyone had been watching closely, they might have noticed the difference, not in what I did but in what I stopped doing. I stopped correcting numbers. At the weekly review, my brother projected a cash flow forecast that leaned hard on assumptions I used to challenge. I nodded. When a supplier line item was duplicated, I let it sit. When he overstated receivables, I asked a neutral question and accepted the vague answer. He relaxed. People always do when resistance disappears. Confidence breeds carelessness. By midweek, the group chat shifted. Less celebration, more reassurance. My father asked if I could take a quick look at the ledger because something felt off. I replied that I was swamped but would circle back. I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I watched. I noted how often my brother left early. How frequently his assistants stayed late. I noticed the new urgency in emails marked urgent that weren't. The language changed. More exclamation points, more optimism, more insistence that things were fine. The rhythm of a lie trying to outrun its own shadow. On Thursday, I was copied on a message by accident. It lasted 30 seconds before it was recalled, but that was enough. A forwarded chain about timing the next draw before compliance pokes around. My name appeared in the thread like a stamp of legitimacy. No one asked if I agreed. They assumed. That assumption was the opening. I booked a dentist appointment during a board prep session and didn't reschedule. I declined a call from the bank and let it go to voicemail. When the compliance officer emailed again, I replied with a single line. Thanks, reviewing internally. It was true. Just not the way they thought. At home, I slept better than I had in years. There's a peculiar peace that comes from knowing the truth and choosing not to weaponize it immediately. I cooked. I walked. I wrote notes by hand, small things I'd learned not to skip when stakes were high. The antagonists grew bolder. At dinner that weekend, my brother joked about expanding, new markets, new risks. My parents praised his vision. He raised his glass and said, to finally cutting dead weight. He looked at me when he said it, smiling as if we shared a private understanding. I raised my glass too. Later, alone in my car, I replayed the day like tape. The boast. The timing. The confidence that came from believing the floor was solid. I added entries to the timeline. Not emotions, behaviors. Dates. Words. Patience isn't passive. It's selective movement. On Monday morning, the bank sent a calendar invite for a routine review. My brother forwarded it to me with a thumbs-up emoji and a note. You're good to vouch, right? I replied, of course. It wasn't a lie. I was good to vouch for the truth. And truth, when it arrives without warning, doesn't need volume. It needs sequence. I watched them lean forward, convinced the story still belonged to them. I let them keep believing it. The review began exactly on time. Glass walls, neutral smiles, a screen shared with columns of numbers that looked calm if you didn't know where to press. The compliance officer asked procedural questions first. Scope, exposure, recent changes. My brother answered smoothly, practiced. He had always been good at performance. When my name came up, he leaned back and gestured toward me. She's our guarantor. Solid. Always has been. I nodded. Then I asked for the document list. Not an accusation. A request. As files populated the screen, I asked for versions. Original uploads. Creation logs. The compliance officer hesitated just long enough to notice. Institutions notice hesitations. She complied. The room changed temperature. I didn't speak quickly. I didn't raise my voice. I pointed to a date and asked where I was that night. I pulled up a boarding pass. I pointed to an IP address and asked who sat at that desk. I asked why my signature appeared in 4 different vector patterns. I asked why a vendor code resolved to a mailbox in a shared office suite. My brother interrupted once. I let him. Then I finished. Pressure isn't force. It's alignment. The compliance officer muted herself and typed. When she came back, her tone was different. Not alarmed, formal. She outlined next steps. Temporary holds. Independent verification. A pause on further draws. My brother smiled too wide and tried to laugh it off. This is just process. It is, I said. And processes have outcomes. After the call, my phone lit up. Missed calls. Texts that started friendly and slid into urgency. My mother asked if everything was okay. My father asked me to come by to talk. My brother sent a single message. Why are you doing this? I didn't reply. Leverage works best when it's quiet. By afternoon, vendors were calling him instead of me. By evening, the bank sent written confirmation of the hold. I forwarded it to the group chat with no commentary. Silence followed. Then apologies began to appear, oddly phrased, aimed at no one in particular. The next day, the manipulation tried a different angle. My parents came to my place unannounced. They spoke of family, of loyalty, of how hard things had been for my brother. My mother cried in a way I recognized, controlled, strategic. My father asked if I could make this go away for the sake of peace. I poured tea. I listened. I said, I'm not doing anything. I'm letting the records speak. They asked about money. About settling. About keeping it inside the family. No, I said. Not loudly. Not angrily. Just once. That night my brother called. He apologized without specifics. He offered to transfer funds back. He suggested we reframe what happened as a misunderstanding. He promised it would never happen again. I asked him to put everything in writing. He didn't. The following morning, the compliance team requested formal statements. Accounting froze the shell vendor. A junior analyst flagged the mirrored signatures in an internal memo. The system did what systems do when fed clean data. I stayed out of the way. There's a moment when pressure reveals character. When options narrow and people choose speed over accuracy. That's when mistakes multiply. By the end of the week, my brother had made 3 of them. And I wrote them down. The first mistake was moving money. He thought speed would look like cooperation. It didn't. It looked like panic. At 8:17 a.m., a transfer hit the account tied to the frozen vendor. Partial, mislabeled, routed through a personal line he assumed no one would cross-check. The bank did. They always do when a review is active. The transaction was flagged, reversed, logged. I learned about it from an automated alert forwarded by compliance. No commentary. Just a record. The second mistake was talking too much. He emailed accounting with instructions that contradicted the story he'd told the bank. He CC'd legal for transparency, then followed up with a text asking them to ignore the email because it was draft. Drafts don't carry timestamps like that. Drafts don't instruct people to backdate. The third mistake was coming to see me. He showed up unannounced, eyes red, voice too steady. He spoke about stress. About pressure. About how the company couldn't survive a prolonged hold. He mentioned our parents. He mentioned my reputation. He mentioned money. I'll make it right, he said. I'll pay you back. Plus interest. I asked him for a full accounting. He offered a number. I asked for a list. He stood up. Collapse doesn't announce itself with explosions. It happens in rooms where chairs scrape too loudly and people forget to breathe. By midweek, the bank's letter arrived. Not dramatic. Precise. It outlined breaches, remedies, timelines. It named me as an aggrieved party and removed me from guarantor exposure effective immediately. It required restitution to the company and referred the matter for external review. I forwarded the letter to my parents. I highlighted one sentence, unauthorized use of personal guarantee. My mother called and said she hadn't known. I believed she hadn't known everything. I also believed she hadn't asked. Both things can be true. The board convened without ceremony. My brother was placed on leave pending investigation. Access revoked. Cards disabled. The office sent out a neutral memo about temporary leadership adjustments. People read between lines faster than they admit. Money began to return, not to me but to where it had been taken from. The shell vendor dissolved under scrutiny. The down payment unraveled. The house sale paused. Each correction revealed another lie, like pulling one thread and watching the seam open. I refused a settlement. Legal suggested it might be efficient. Quiet. Faster. I declined. Efficiency had been their cover. I wanted accuracy. That weekend I walked the long way home. The city felt different when you weren't carrying other people's secrets. I slept without my phone beside me for the first time in months. On Monday my brother sent a final message. It wasn't an apology. It was an accusation. He said I'd always resented him. He said I was enjoying this. I didn't respond. Enjoyment is loud. What I felt was gravity. The system kept moving. The system didn't care about our history or the dinners or the laughter. It cared about records, responsibilities, and repair. By Friday there was nothing left for him to control. And I still hadn't raised my voice. The review widened without anyone announcing it. That's how institutions do things when they're confident. No spectacle, just scope. Legal brought in an external firm. Compliance requested archival access. IT preserved logs. Each department touched a different edge of the same truth, and the shape became unmistakable. I was asked to give a statement. I scheduled it for a morning I knew I'd be calm. The questions were careful. Chronological. I answered with dates, not adjectives. When they asked how I felt, I said I was focused on accuracy. When they asked what I wanted, I said I wanted the record to be complete. They thanked me for my clarity. My brother's statement came later. I wasn't there, but I read the summary. He blamed stress. He blamed poor controls. He suggested shared responsibility without naming names. The firm noted discrepancies. They always do. Exposure spreads in quiet ways. A lender declined a renewal. An insurer requested additional disclosures. A vendor asked for personal guarantees, this time from him. The room he'd filled with confidence emptied one decision at a time. At home, my parents stopped calling daily. When they did call, the tone had changed. Less defense. More distance. My mother asked what would happen next. I said I didn't know. That was true. Outcomes belong to processes, not people. The external firm issued interim findings. No headlines. No drama. Just language that closed doors. Unauthorized access. Misrepresentation. Control failures tied to specific users. The words were clinical. They were enough. I received a letter confirming my removal from all liabilities and acknowledging damages incurred on my behalf. It included an apology, not emotional but formal. I filed it. The family group chat went silent. Weeks passed. The company stabilized under interim leadership. Staff returned to routines. Systems were tightened. The noise moved on to other things. My brother didn't. He texted once, late, asking if we could talk as siblings. I didn't block him. I didn't reply. Silence is a boundary when words would reopen doors. Exposure finished its work when the final report landed. It named actions. It named actors. It recommended restitution and referral. It didn't mention me beyond the facts. That was the point. I read it once, then put it away. The hardest part surprised me, not the betrayal, not the collapse, but the letting go. The urge to explain myself. To be understood. To correct the story one last time. I didn't. I changed my routine. Morning walks. Work that was mine alone. I ate at the same small place every Thursday and learned the server's name. Power, when reclaimed quietly, shows up in ordinary days. A letter arrived from legal asking if I wished to pursue further action. I wrote back, no additional claims at this time. They acknowledged receipt. I slept. The exposure had done what it needed to do. It had returned balance without asking for applause. All that remained was reckoning, not in courtrooms but between people who could no longer pretend. We met in a neutral place. No family home. No office. A small cafe with windows that faced the street, not each other. I chose it because conversations end more cleanly when there's movement outside reminding you the world doesn't pause for closure. My brother arrived early. He stood when he saw me, then sat back down, uncertain. He looked smaller. Not defeated, unanchored. I didn't think it would go this far, he said. I nodded. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. He talked in loops. About pressure. About expectations. About how everyone leaned on him once the business grew. He said my competence made it easy to borrow trust. He said he planned to fix it before anyone noticed. I let him finish. When you took my name, I said, you made a decision for me. Everything after that was maintenance. He asked if I could help him now. Not with money, with introductions. With smoothing things over. With a word in the right ear. No, I said. He looked at his hands. So that's it. That's the boundary. He asked if I hated him. I said no. Hatred would have kept us entangled. What I felt was clarity. We paid separately. Outside the air was sharp. He asked if we could still be family. I said we could be civil with distance. That trust doesn't regenerate on demand. He nodded like someone writing something down internally. At home, my parents asked for a call. We spoke carefully. They apologized in fragments, what they'd missed, what they'd assumed. I accepted the apology they were able to give, not the one I wanted. That's another kind of boundary. I told them I wouldn't be involved in the business again. Not advisory. Not emergency. Not quietly fixing things at night. They understood. Or they pretended to. Either way, the line held. Reckoning isn't punishment. It's alignment between what happened and what follows. I boxed up old files and returned keys I didn't need anymore. I closed accounts that had been open in my name since I was useful. I updated my will. Not because I was afraid, because I was finished being vague. One afternoon, a message arrived from the bank's compliance officer thanking me for my cooperation and wishing me well. It felt final in the best way. I took a long walk and noticed things I hadn't when my attention was split. Trees and leaf, a neighbor's dog that always pulled toward the same corner, the sound of a train slowing. The reckoning had ended without shouting. All that was left was to live in the space it created. Zipper mouth face. The morning settled into a shape that belonged to me. I woke without bracing. I worked without scanning for emergencies that weren't mine. My calendar had white space in it, real space, not the kind you fill with apologies later. I learned the difference. I moved my money. I separated accounts. I chose institutions that asked fewer questions because my record answered them already. I took on work that didn't need my last name to open doors. The first check I received was modest and clean. I framed it for a week, then put it away. The family business continued, smaller, steadier, without my fingerprints. I heard updates secondhand. I didn't correct them. I didn't offer suggestions. Distance did its quiet work. My brother found employment elsewhere. Not glamorous. Not public. He didn't call. When our paths crossed at holidays, we exchanged polite words. We sat at different ends of tables. Peace doesn't require proximity. My parents adjusted slowly. They asked fewer favors. They stopped assuming my availability. When they spoke about my brother, they did it without asking me to fix the feeling. That was progress. I built routines that had nothing to do with repair. I cooked. I read books without taking notes. I walked the same route until the city felt familiar again. I slept. One afternoon, I deleted the timeline folder. Not out of forgiveness. Out of completion. What stayed wasn't the evidence or the numbers or the leverage. It was the knowledge that power doesn't need to announce itself to be real. That dignity can be reclaimed without spectacle. That the quiet choice to stop absorbing other people's risk can change the trajectory of a life. Sometimes I think about that night, the laughter, the word wretch, the back door. It no longer tightens my chest. It reads like a line from a different draft. The check they received did exactly what it was meant to do. It revealed the truth faster than argument ever could. And when the truth finished moving through the system, it left me with something simple and durable. My name back where it belongs.